Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Paget, the Program Director for the Massachusetts Cultural Facilities Fund. And that is a planning and capital grant program in Massachusetts that's administered by the Mass Cultural Council and Mass Development. And so we're here today to talk about cultural facility development in Massachusetts, but specifically the adaptive reuse of public buildings for creative and community purposes. So I'm joined today with Kara Mahoney from the Harwich Cultural Affairs Department.
Mhm.
Greetings.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to see you
Good to
again.
see you.
So Kara is the not only the Director of Cultural Affairs, but manages the 204 Municipal Arts Building in
hmm
Harwich.
Yes.
So this is going to be the main part of the conversation. We want to unpack a little bit how this project came into being, and talk about the origins of the project right up through the current operations today.
hmm
So thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
This is
Thanks for
great.
having me. It's a
We're
good
going to do a
time.
series of these with a few projects like yours around the state. So this is very exciting for us because at the Cultural Facilities Fund, we do see municipal buildings used for creative purposes where they're housing artists to do work. And the Cultural Facilities Fund also funds the place where once the work is done, it's presented at theaters, museums, and galleries. So from our perspective, it's a super important uh, part of the creative process where for most people who work creatively, 90% of what you do ends up on the cutting room floor, so to speak, and 10% might actually go to the gallery wall or to the stage. So thank
hmm
you for providing that sort of workspace environment that's harder to come by these days. So thanks.
Certainly. It's a pleasure.
So, Kara, could you tell us about the actual facility itself and
hmm
its characteristics and what happens there?
Yeah, definitely. So the facility is on record as the 204 Sisson Road Municipal Building. We
Okay.
call it the 204 Cultural Arts Municipal Building. It's a 77,000 square foot facility that houses 36 artist studios. We have 41 artists that occupy the space because we have shared studio space. And we also have several rooms that are offered for multi use purposes. So we have a 239 seat auditorium, there's a kitchen cafeteria space. There is the former library that we use for a lot of galleries, that is also our exhibit space. And we have one room that's the lower studio that's actually been transformed from an artist studio to now a classroom workshop space. So we hold dance classes in there and a variety of other programs for arts. We do have a small, we call it the Fab Lab. It's a small creative space that's also offered for after school programming. We have several departments within the town that actually use our spaces for creative development courses, and our youth and family services operate some of their programs out of our Fab Lab. So it's a really cool opportunity. We also house a gymnasium in there. So the building is quite significant, and it is rather vast as far as the size that we have and the opportunities that we have available to people. With the artist studios, they range in size from 150 square feet to
Mhm.
upwards about 1,100 square feet in space. And that could be a single occupancy in that 1,000 square foot. Some of the shared spaces, you're looking at around 250 to 300 square feet for each artist in that general space. They share the same access and the room in general, and they kind of put a line down the middle, and that's your spot, that's my spot, and it works out well. So it's a really good opportunity for people. We have open public hours that we offer to the community to come in and witness anyone that they'd like to, but we do offer open studio days throughout the years where people can come in and actually witness people, talk to the artist, meet the artist. So it's an opportunity to really showcase the artist in itself. For multi-purpose spaces, we provide access for anyone to rent those spaces for their purposes. So through the exhibit, we have people that come in once a month for various galleries and openings and showings. And then we have community performances, either free or ticketed events in our auditorium, and then various like health environmental fairs, community fairs. Other groups and organizations will come in and provide climate summits and so on and so forth. So it's a great space.
It's a real active space. I can tell already. So, are you managing this yourself, or do you have a staff that helps you? Because it sounds like there's a lot going on there.
So there is. We have one part-time staff,
Hmm.
and then there's my role. So within the Department of Cultural Affairs, we have the one full-time position, and all of the oversight of the facility is within the control of Cultural Affairs. We have the one part-time program aide that allows us the opportunity to kind of help with those nights and weekends hours when we have all the bulk of our programming.
Right.
As far as that goes, we do collaborate with the facilities department through the DPW to kind of manage the big ticket items, so to speak. So they help me with heat related matters, or, I'm not fixing boilers anytime soon. So they come in for that. Aside from that, there's really no other hands in it. We do work on a volunteer network as well. So if we ever have to bring in some extra hands to help us, we do have a group of volunteers that come in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know other buildings that do this, they have agreements of participation at some level, and we can get into that
Mm-hmm.
with the artists that are fortunate enough to have a space. So that's a really good overview. There's pieces of that we want to drill into a little bit more, because the reason we're doing this is not only to tell your story, but so that others who want to do something
Mm-hmm.
similar to this can see how you put the package together and keep all the balls in the air, so to speak. So let's go back. It's 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And can you go back and tell us what the origin story is for this space becoming what it is today?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2011, the school had released to the town of Harwich stating that they were going to be having release of that school property because they were regionalizing between Chatham and Harwich for their school system. So then, fast forward to 2012, the town of Harwich at the time, the select board had accepted the fact that there'd be surplus property coming. And then in 2014, the school officially moved out and it was empty. It kind of remained empty, so to speak, about a year. I mean, that's kind of being a little facetious. It was in 2015 that they started allowing the recreation department and the police department to use the facility for some programming while they still figured it out. And then there were some things coming online between questions through town meeting on what to do with that property, who's going to do what with that property. And it was in 2017 that, under the direction of the community center director, that they welcomed the new artist into the facility. So that's when they officially opened studio rental space at the time. To get there was several questions that were presented to the community members as far as what to do with that space. And the biggest contender was housing. As we know, on Cape Cod, housing is a big crisis. And the housing piece was whether or not they could build on that land. As far as the housing goes, can they use it? Can they convert the school? There was a lot of questions that were delved into that. There was a group of individuals that kind of worked hand in hand with the select board very early on to determine those needs through community assessment platforms and understanding if that's something that they could do. It ultimately came down to a non-binding question on a ballot for a town meeting, and that came down to whether or not what the town truly wanted it for. So they had to vote. Housing, of course, was the highest vote, and the second highest vote at the time was for municipal use or creative purposes. And then there was like four other options really buried down. So ultimately, due to the fact that housing could not take place on that property, that's when they moved forward for municipal use as well as creative use. So they started to do the artist studios, and they were lease agreements at the time that they would just be 1 year terms that they'd come in. And it took about a year and a half or so, and they were at full capacity. And this is all pre pandemic. So it was really great. It was a great group of individuals that were involved with it from the beginning. So the community center director had a team that was over there that worked there. There was several staff members. They did an exceptional job trying to welcome everyone, but also work with an as-is building. That was the biggest thing. Is the school, took all their stuff out and there wasn't much left behind. So it was a lot of figuring out what does that look like, and everything for anyone coming in to rent the space was an as-is condition. And that was something that the artists knew. They weren't working in air conditioning. They weren't working in, very great heat. I mean, there was heat, but it was spotty. So there were a lot of things that had to get worked out and kind of worked through. And then they really did an exceptional job with navigating those obstacles in the very beginning.
So I'm curious. So the idea of housing falls off as the number one for various uh, infrastructure disconnects, as I
Mm-hmm.
understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the number two option is creative spaces and uses for the town. And I think a critical piece to this is that the town decided to take on the management and the oversight of this venture, where many other towns do. They put up an
Mm-hmm.
RFP, and the RFP is responded to by community groups, and they run it.
Right.
So this is very unique. But I'm trying to see, so the condition of the building the school moved out in 2014. The
Mm-hmm.
artist moved in 2017. Was there an assessments of the building and any sort of construction cost to get the building
Mm-hmm.
uh, ready for the new use?
Yeah, so great question. So, as far as assessments went, the facilities manager through the Department of Public Works did have an ADA assessment done, did have a variety of assessments as far as what he went through and said, all right, let's look at the roof, let's look at the boilers, let's look at everything. So, he created kind of a list. In order to function and operate that facility, there was a request for money. So, early on, it was, I think, around 2015, 2016, that they made a request at a town meeting for $125,000 to be transferred to start a revolving fund, which is what's currently existent today, to be able to provide the opportunity to have all the utilities and expenses paid for the facility. And then all of the artist studio rent, once it came in as the revenue source to that revolving fund. So all of that rental structure actually pays for the utilities of the facility through the revolving fund. And the revolving fund started back with just that 125,000 to get it up and running.
Mhm.
As far as the other works and projects, a lot of what we have been able to accomplish has been within the last 3 years, and that has all been through grant funding or capital investment through a town meeting. But prior to that, it was a very bare bones, bare minimum budget line, and it was a little bit of band-aids, which is very common for a lot of facilities like this when a town takes it on.
Mhm.
It's just
Mhm.
get it to where it's operational, and then let's see how it evolves, and then we go from there.
So the 125,000 was like seed money, working capital, the physical assessment, capital needs assessment, and accessibility
Mm-hmm.
assessment were already conducted. So that the 125 didn't pay for that.
Correct.
Was there any beside operating costs of utility bills and insurance and things like that?
Mm-hmm.
Snow removal, although that may be part of the town's budget
Mm-hmm.
anyway. Was there any capital renovations that had to happen out of that 125, or were things in good
None.
shape?
So things
Okay,
were in good enough shape, let's put it that way.
yeah.
So when the school, part of the school process, when they shut down a building, is when they have to give it back to the town, they need to provide the town with an extensive itemized list as far as what they know. So leading into when the town accepted this as surplus property, they already knew of 5 different things that were potentially going to be a problem as we got closer down the line. And when the town officially took back control of the property, they had the internal assessments done, which validated all of those items that were listed and maybe pointed out a few others. But there was no capital investment at the time. It was just, let's keep moving forward and see how long we can get.
Yeah, short of capital investment, having the knowledge of what would be needed maybe in year
Mm-hmm.
5 or year 7 is super valuable. And
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that the town took this seriously enough to start a new venture, but start from a position of strength. Even if it didn't have a lot of capital dollars to put in, at least you kind of know what's
Mm-hmm.
coming next. Okay, so it's 2017. I wanted to ask how you secured the tenants or the artists in this case.
Mm-hmm.
How did you find the population of creative people to come in and fill out applications for this? And did you curate that in any way, trying to get a balance of mediums and disciplines of artistic
Mm-hmm.
nature?
Yeah, so under the direction of the community center director, when they opened, Carolyn Carey, she had a team that would work to help secure this. And as one of my artists likes to tell the story, is she said, one day I drove by the building and the marquee on the street was empty. And the next day I drove by and it said, studios available for rent. And she immediately went in and wanted to figure out what it was all about and met with the team there. So there are several members that used to work there, and they would fill out an application process, and they would sit down with a gal named Erica, another Erica, and they would have the opportunity to sit there and chat through kind of what they do, how often they'd be utilizing this space, and in what capacity they plan on being there. From that point, that's when they would be essentially awarded an agreement to rent the facility, and that was all funneled right then and there. And they were given just 1 year term agreements. There were some that would travel and whatnot, so maybe they had a 6 month, but they're predominantly were meant for 1 year. And those were lease agreements at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's evolved since, but that was how everything started. Part of the renewal process was also that same interview they conducted. So they would have an opportunity to kind of sit down with the same staff and then kind of justify why they should be able to stay versus why they should be asked to leave or not. And part of that too, there were things where you had to be a good citizen of the building. So you had to be a team player, you had to be within the community, within arts. Back then it was more, certain, are you an actual artist or are you just coming in to use it as, a storage space? So
Right.
some very similar models we've carried through. We do have more stricter restrictions now as far as the artist piece goes than what started. I think when it started, it was just meant like practicing artists. And through the community center director and the other individuals that were involved, they had a great network already in town. The Cape is just extreme when it comes to the artists and creatives. So it wasn't very difficult to find the people.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a great community that they were already working with.
So word of mouth
Absolutely.
helped. Local cultural council
Yes.
has a network as well,
Mm-hmm.
as do the surrounding towns. So was that review process done after the 1 year term was up of the initial leases, and then you revisited to see if the participation
Right.
and participation in the building and being an active working artist
Right.
were in line with your vision.
Right. And as long as that carried through, they were able to renew their license again. So that were their lease again.
So talk about you've gone from annual leases now to licenses, and what is the difference?
Right. So the current town administrator for Harwich had decided in 2022 that we needed to change the process because the way town property is rented should be really through a license agreement, which are 3-year agreements between, the rentee and the town of Harwich. And so that ensued a whole lot of, crazy that came along with it because you're dealing with a lot of people who had been in that facility from the beginning origin. A lot of them might be a little concerned about losing their space and having to justify it. And at the end of the day, what we were just doing was cleaning up the paperwork and making sure the appropriate agreements were being signed and validated. But it also gave us an opportunity to weed out some of the folks that were using space for storage. Mm-hmm. So when I started in 2022, there was a lot of empty studios, meaning they were just storage facilities and there was no artist. Mm-hmm. And we'd go 8 months to a year before I'd see that artist. And that was something we didn't want. We wanted to create this vibrant community for the town. We wanted people to come in and see people. We wanted to give anyone truly, whether they were a visitor or a community member, an opportunity to feel inspired when they walked in the door. So in order to do that, we had to make those changes. So some of the restrictions that we implemented as part of the RFP process was that you had to be a full-time resident of Cape Cod. And you could not be leaving your studio vacant for longer than 4 weeks at a time. Certainly there's obviously things like medical or things that come up and people work with us, but when it comes down to the end of the day, like you needed to be a full-time practicing creative and artist on Cape Cod. Preference was given to Harwich community members first and then branched out if we didn't have enough. And so when we started this process, it was an open application for everyone. So all of the current artists in the facility had to reapply to it, and it was open to anybody. So we don't keep a wait list or a studio list of people that are looking. Everybody has to fall suit with this public open process.
Which this now runs
Which
on a
is
3-year
now
cycle.
on this 3-year cycle. And
okay.
As the person who does that side of it and reviews the applications with a kind of a group and a committee, it takes the stress out of it, because that's the biggest thing, is you're able to evaluate based on the actual, like, what's in there as for parameters, not necessarily the different opportunities that I am as an artist or my portfolio as an artist. We're looking at the XYZs, which is, first, are you a resident of Cape Cod and Harwich? Great, we keep going. And then the community involvement piece. So we do require all of our artists to be present for all of our open studios. If they're not able to attend due to a pre-existing commitment, then they can do that through volunteer hours. So whether they volunteer through one of our programs or they help with setups or things like that, that is how the RFP process is built now. They get the 3-year, and then they have to reapply again once the 3 years up. So we're actually coming to that process. So in 2026, they'll actually have to all reapply, and it'll be open to everybody to apply at that point too.
So it's not staggered. Everyone's on the same 3-year
Yes.
timeline. Okay,
Yep.
that's interesting. I do want to. We'll circle back and see how that works, because you do learn as you operate this type of a business how to operate the business, right? So I want to talk a little bit about the finance portion of this. Clearly, it's amazing that the town of Harwich seed funded a revolving fund to get you up and running. And now you generate revenue from rental of the facility, and you also have to operate a facility with staff, utility costs, insurance, and things like that. So, big picture, how has it been successful in that the town may not need to keep capitalizing this revolving fund, or is it not quite breaking even and the town needs to subsidize it a bit, or is it breaking even or generating positive revenue?
Yeah, so I'd say for the most part it's breaking even, but if
Mm-hmm.
you say you take out that 125, then it's not. I think that original funding is what helped get everything up and running. At the end of the day, the artist studio spaces provide the operation cost. So the facility itself, my salary is not part of the facility's operations budget. It is part of the town's operations budget. So my salary as the director is unique and distinct, and it's separated from it. However, our custodian, we have a part-time custodian and the part-time program aide, their salaries are out of the revolving account along with various supplies for the facility, paper, trash, etc. And then we have all of the utilities. So just the artist studio space provides the oversight of those financials. So we're able to say 145,000 roughly a year in expenses, that's including all utilities, and then say it's 165,000 a year in revenues from studio space and maybe other rentals. So anything we get just keeps building in the revolving fund so that we can keep carrying it over. So it still would be several years before we can evolve into a capital project being funded by that account in general. So there is these bigger projects that we still would have to seek through grants or capital funding that we have to do.
Yeah, I think that's really, I'm glad to hear that operating wise, it breaks even or a little bit better. But anytime you run into big capital expenses, I think you're going to have to go to other sources. And that's the Cultural Facilities Fund is part of that. The reason the Facilities Fund was created in Massachusetts was the recognition that the capital expense generally is above and beyond the break even operating that so many the facilities have. So I know we're going to wrap this up pretty soon, but I want to get to the idea of public benefit, economic development, and what's good for the town, and maybe what's different now that this is up and running as to what things were like before. I know maybe you don't have all that information, but just want to know a little bit about if others want to do this, what's the upside? To this?
I think, to first to start is that you need a dedicated department for sure. I think our community center director is fabulous, and she did a fabulous job with this current building that we sit in to do this interview. But for her to be stretched thin to try to do 2 facilities, it was an undertaking. When I came in, I was so fortunate to have prior experience with the town of Plymouth with the same type of concept where I managed a facility there. Large facility, auditorium, 1,500 seat. We did same similar module with community programming, recreation programming, municipal government use, veteran use, and so forth. So it was kind of, for me, easy to hit the ground running when I walked in the door because I knew all of the high level things that had to get done and how to best use the focus moving forward. So looking at that, it's one of those things. The best for community involvement was that we have seen such an uptick about the interest and arts in general, but culture and just people coming to Harwich, learning more. And we've met so many of our neighbors. So all of our neighboring towns are starting to come out to the public events that we do. And we tend to always ask everybody, where are you coming from? What brought you in today, whether it's an open studio or a community event we're running. And we meet a lot of people from the Cape that would have never even come to our facility before. And then we're able to provide now through the department, because we have the sole focus, an opportunity of specific programming to really enhance that opportunity of economic growth in the town. So we provide various what we call signature events throughout the year that drive, hundreds to thousands of people in town. That means they're going out in town to use the restaurants, to go shopping. And then we have a lot of collaborations between the cultural district, because part of my job as well is to oversee those two cultural districts in town. I can work with our merchants and restaurants to have collaborative events that help benefit people to understand what Harwich is all about, but also get into the town and really enhance what it is to be in Harwich and visit. So really, you need direct oversight. You need a committed department to be able to move it. It can be done, as it was proven, it can be done by another department that's kind of stretching out beyond their means in the town, but it is best that you have it so that you just have one person with a sole direction and a sole support that can give all of the investment to that one purpose.
I think the fact that you have two cultural districts and you have a municipal arts building is really reason for a full-time staff to do this. So in closing, I want you to just say quickly, if you were advising another municipality to go down this path, now that you have the arc of the story from beginning to getting it on its feet and running to now actually running really wonderfully. Uh, is there any tips or advice you'd like to pass on to others?
Community support is huge. So knowing who your community key players are and having that support before starting is number one. If it wasn't for the community in general welcoming me with open arms, I wouldn't have been successful. Having the community and just really being thoughtful about the whole process and what that means in the long term, not necessarily just the short term.
Community impact. Well, Kara, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to give us your insights into this. I think these projects exemplify how surplus public buildings can really be used. It can have a second life from a school into a wonderfully creative
Yeah.
community asset that not only serves the community spirit but also brings people in town to experience that sort of unique flavor because they're all different. So I think what I heard is that your strategic planning with the town and the community engagement and this phased approach that you learn as you go, and you didn't shoot for the moon and at the very beginning. You just got certificate of occupancy. The building was safe. The building was code compliant, and then now you're building the future as you go. So
Thank
congratulations.
you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.